Now, few would argue against the need for schools to change. Whether you're thinking about the grouping and scheduling system that was developed in the 19th century that we still use, or the curriculum that is largely based on 20th century skills, or the fact that our high-stakes standardized tests are killing creativity in our students. Not to mention new technologies, ubiquitous communication and information systems. These challenges that the world brings us, that our schools need to adapt. So why is it that something that is so high on the agenda of educators and policymakers the world over seems to be so slow in coming? The answer is this. All change in schools starts or stops with teachers. See, as teachers, we're in the change business. It's our job to manage the physical changes that are taking place in the brains of our students every single day. And any change that someone else wants to impose on that, if it does not help that change, we just shut the door. We resist. Now, we're learning all the time. From the moment we're born, our brain is constantly taking in new information, recycling the information that we already have. And what this is doing is creating mental models of the world. These make us comfortable. That I know when I wake up tomorrow morning, the world will largely be the same as I left it the night before. So I have an expectation. This is what allows us to travel without too much fear. We know that certain signs mean it's okay to go in here, or others, no. So when we consider making those changes in education, we have to consider what's important to teachers. Let's consider a change that most teachers have actually had to manage in the last few years. Okay, something that is sort of changing the world over, a new technology, smartboards. Now, most teachers have had to adapt to using smartboards in their classrooms, moving away from chalkboards and whiteboards. So we all have smartboards now, and that was not an individual choice. That was not something that any single teacher said, you know what, I want a smartboard in my classroom, I'm going to go down to the mall and pick one up and put it in. No, this was a systems level decision, or at least a school level decision. And when they were planning it, this is probably what it looked like to them. This is how organizations see change. It's a nice, smooth curve. Okay, in the beginning, some people will be in denial, yes, okay. And then maybe there'll be a little bit of resistance. But eventually they'll explore the technology, they'll integrate it, and everyone will be committed to using the smartboard. So we'll focus on the environment, we'll put the smartboards in, and then we'll focus on the people, meaning we'll give you some training on the technology, some features and benefits, and yeah, here's how to use it. Okay? That's not what it looks like to the teacher. So let's look at that side of it, the human side of change. Oh, by the way, I want to thank my daughter for helping me illustrate this. She gracefully agreed. In the beginning, yes, there's a little bit of shock, some surprise. Wait, what are they doing? Followed by denial. Oh, they are not putting that in my classroom. Frustration comes next. I cannot believe they're doing this. Everything was fine before. I don't need this. Disengagement happens at the bottom of that curve. You know what? I don't care anyway. Eventually, experimentation. Okay, you know what? It's already there. Hey, this does some cool things. Maybe my students can teach me a little bit about how this new technology works. All right. Maybe this does enhance learning a little bit. I think I can figure out ways to integrate this into my lesson planning. And finally, integration. Okay, now it's a part of what I do. Now it makes sense. See, our internal response to an external change is emotional. When someone else wants us to change, we have an emotional response to it. Now, this change curve, this can happen for some people in a matter of about 10 minutes, maybe even 10 seconds. You go through all those thoughts in your head, and you're like, oh, cool, smartboard. Others, it might take 10 months. Or they might not get through it at all. They might reach that point where they say, you know what, I don't care at all anyway, and I'm going to go find a school that doesn't have smartboards. That's getting harder and harder to do, obviously. And they might suffer from what's called misoneism. It's a fear, intolerance, hatred, fear, or intolerance of innovation or change. Now, all of us have that to some degree. You know how you always seem to choose the same seat in the classroom or in the conference room when you go in? That just makes us comfortable. If I asked you all to stand up and move one seat to your left, you'd all get very annoyed at me right now. So I won't do that. So how do we manage this change? How do we manage this emotional roller coaster that we go through when we're faced with changes that we didn't initiate? Well, in the beginning, we need information. We need clear communication, and we need facts. In the absence of communication, we create rumors. And our brains are very, very good at making stuff up based on very little evidence. Tends to get a lot bigger. At the bottom, we need emotional support. And here's the key thing, the difference between the organizational perspective and the human perspective. That emotional support does not come from outside. That comes from within our support structure, our peers. It only comes from other teachers. So that helps us get through the emotional dip and through the other side where we need direction and guidance. We need a vision. We need a map to help us get there. But without that support in the middle, the change will take longer and will likely be a lot more painful. Now, this conference has been about change, and it seems to be a common thread running through change. We consider change painful in a lot of ways. That's shifting your future mental model to a new reality that you weren't prepared for. So let me share with you a different way of looking at this when consider managing change, when you want change to happen. It looks like this. Don't worry if you're not good at math. It's not really math. This is philosophy. The P stands for pain. And not real pain. Nobody's stepping on your toe or punching you in the stomach. This is perceived pain. So if the perceived pain of the change is greater than the perceived pain of the present, we don't change. Period. The converse is also true. If the perceived pain of the change is less than the perceived pain of the present, change happens. So the key learning from this is that if you want to see change happen, you must reduce the amount of perceived pain. I'll illustrate this with an example from my own experience. Now, about 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, a colleague and mentor of mine, Steve Barclay, and I went to one of the top schools in Istanbul, in Turkey, actually. It's a 138-year-old school. They have an excellent teaching staff. And when we sat down with the leadership of that school, they shared with us their vision for the future, to stay on top. That vision was essentially they wanted to see visible learning taking place throughout the school, not just with the students, with the teachers as well. They wanted the glass-walled classroom where everyone can see everything and everyone is engaged in what's called professional learning conversations, where we intentionally try to improve our practice by working directly with our peers on what matters most, learning. Now, to get there, one of the most effective ways of bringing that about is to invite teachers to visit each other's classrooms, peer observation, and to give structured feedback based on what the teacher needs or wants to improve. That's peer coaching. So, we designed a training program. We came in, we spent an entire day with the staff, put them through the training, giving them some basic skills on peer observation and coaching, and did some follow-up workshops, voluntary, so they could come and increase their skills only about a month or maybe 6 weeks later, and then made ourselves available to anyone who wanted to volunteer for one-to-one coaching throughout the term. And by the end of the year, we had summarily failed. Absolutely. Now, there were some people who were interested, and also some people who really took part and gained a lot out of it. But on an institutional level, it just didn't happen. We didn't affect the kind of change we wanted. So we actually went back to the beginning to figure out what went wrong. Now, this is Steve Barclay's model for managing school change, and it's pretty straightforward. It's a backwards planning design for managing change in schools. The end result, our goal, is student achievement. We want our students to learn and do well. Now, the only ones that can do that are our students. It's what students do that drives their achievement. But what students do is driven by what teachers do, the teaching behaviors, and any change in teaching behaviors has to be driven by the school community, your peers, the support system, your professional learning community. And ultimately, at the very back end, changing leadership behavior to allow the time, the resources, and the support to implement any of those changes moving forward. And that's why we failed. Because we started implementing from the back, giving the support for the kind of change they wanted to see, but we didn't plan from the student achievement side, moving forward with the teachers. To them, the pain of the change was too great. They're already doing a great job in their classrooms. So why change? So we went back to the beginning. We asked them, how do you define student achievement? We were fortunate because they spent 2 years prior developing their own objectives, 20 descriptors underneath these 5 headings that is the profile of what they want from each of their graduates. So we took the entire staff and spent a full day, actually a day and a half, answering the question, if we were to walk into any single classroom in the school, what should we see students doing that gives us evidence that they are making progress towards or have achieved each of those descriptors, each of your objectives? By the end of those 2 days, we had 84 individual observable student behaviors, which we then grouped under those themes. We took a couple steps forward by testing those very observable behaviors. The leadership of the school, the heads of department and their administrative team, went out and started observing classrooms. But they weren't looking at teachers, and this is the key. They were looking at the students. They were looking at what the students were doing. Where's the evidence of their learning? They tested it just amongst themselves in the first term. In the second term, spread it throughout the rest of the school. Started observing the learning going on in all of the classrooms. Communicating with the teachers the whole time that this is something that they defined. And because these learning walks would always be 2 or 3 people for no longer than 5 to 7 minutes in any classroom, and always focused on what the students are doing, we even created a data collection form to help us organize, but most importantly, to facilitate the conversation afterward between those 2 or 3 people to talk about what they'd observed, coming to a shared definition of what some of these behaviors actually look like in the classroom. There were some great debates around different areas of it. For example, paraphrasing, how that might look different in a science class than in an English class, or at different levels. It's not important to come up with an answer. What was critical is these teachers were then asking each other that question. Now, here's the results. By the end of last year, more than 600 classes were visited. So far, just at the end of the first term this year, more than 500 classroom visits have happened, and they're still going to continue on through the second term. Only now, the teachers own it. At the beginning of the year, we gave it to them. We invited them to take part in the process and take ownership of the process. So they're going into each other's classrooms, observing what's happening, and talking about it. Completely voluntary, and that's the number. Remember, the year prior, the pain of the change was too great. So, what did we learn from this experience? A few things. Now, the teachers, we asked them only 2 weeks ago for feedback on the whole process. What did they learn? Number one, increased student empathy. They understood better what it was like to be a student and the demands of their daily lives. They also got to see their students responding and behaving differently in other teachers' classrooms than they do in theirs. Second, increased collegiality, more empathy for each other. And in fact, even though the focus is on students, the reality is it's the teaching behaviors that drive the student behaviors, and a lot of teachers mentioned that they were inspired to try new things in their classrooms. And third, and this is my favorite part, a few of the teachers responded that they think it would be a great idea to increase the amount of time spent in the classroom, maybe for a whole period, and to be able to provide feedback based on what was observed. In other words, what we had tried to do 2 years prior with peer observation and peer coaching, now a small handful, not everyone has done it, but at least now some recognize that they want it. So what did we learn from this process? Number one, change only ever happens one person at a time. It is not an organism, no matter how big the change, no matter how big the group of people, it is always one person at a time. Number two, while the vision is important, you have to be able to see your feet. If you shrink the change, if you reduce the perceived pain of the change, that one step is very easy. And number three, be selfish. Make choices that are right for you within any change. Find what's in it for you and use that to motivate yourself. Be naive. Do not believe anybody when they tell you you can't change the world, but start with yourself. And number three, be willfully optimistic. Choose to believe that tomorrow will be better than today, and when you fall down, get back up and keep going.